Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part 2. So in my last video, I was going over the table that I did on the word mitosis, and the way I came up with that idea to do a table on the word mitosis is because this video that Jonathan Clegg was talking about, that was done by Lady Gaga, I guess it was a music video, but in it she said that there was going to be a mitosis because Satan has their own plans. They always imitate God. And so, like I said in my last video, the entire earth is a representation of DNA, and the entire earth is going to split. There's going to be a separation between light and darkness. You can see that starting from Genesis and the pattern of the division taking place in verses Genesis 1:7 and 1:8 and Genesis 1:17, 1:18. I've talked about that before. It's also in Genesis 1:4. I'll go ahead and show you that real quick. Okay, God tells us the end from the beginning, and I've shown before how there's a division here between the light and the darkness in verse 4, which makes the number 14. It was on Nisan 14th that the veil of the temple was rent in twain. It says, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And so this is what's going to happen when Jesus comes back. But then you see it again in verse 17. It says, and God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so, and of course Psalm 117 is the psalm that divides the entire Bible. But then you see the division also taking place. It continues to talk about the firmament through to verse 18, starting with verse 16. And then if you go to Genesis 1:17, which again is a 1:17 code, and 1:18, you see the division taking place again. It says, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good. So the division takes place here in Genesis 1:18, which is the 1:18 code. Okay, so that matches up with the table that I did on mitosis, because it's all a representation of the DNA and how the DNA is going to be restored. And as you can see, the mitosis is depicted by being a symmetrical pattern. I'll go ahead and play a little bit of this video so you can see what Lady Gaga was showing in the video of how the mitosis was going to take place. But you see how everything is symmetrical, and it's like a cell that's dividing. Okay, Jonathan Clegg paused the video here because he's also explaining that mitosis is the two cells dividing. So you see that he showed that there. And so that's what this is a representation of. It's a representation of a cell dividing, which is the DNA splitting, because the entire cell splits when the DNA divides and replicates. And so this is an illustration of DNA, but you can see how it's all symmetrical. Okay, and I know that was a gross version of it, but you can see a much less gross version of the symmetry here with the way God encoded the word mitosis in the Bible. It's interesting that it says, I am Jehovah your God in the middle of this table. It comes up at the top when it's just the word mitosis, but over here it says, but the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They walked not in my statutes, and they rejected mine ordinances. If any man keep, he shall live in them, and my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. Then I said I would pour out my wrath upon them in the wilderness to consume them. And as I was reading the scriptures, I realized that the scripture in 2021 read exactly as it did in 2013, because then as I continued to read, it was almost like I was reading the same thing over again. When I read 2021, it says, but the children rebelled against me. They walked not in my statutes, neither kept mine ordinances to do them, which if a man do, he shall live in them. They profaned my Sabbaths, and I said I would pour out my wrath upon them to accomplish my anger against them in the wilderness. And so it was as I was reading the matrix that I realized there was a symmetrical pattern, and then the scriptures that fell right in the middle were 2017 and 2018, which are the exact two scriptures that come up when you put in just the word mitosis. Okay, and I'll show you that in a minute, but apparently I was showing the table that I did on the word theophany, which is what I showed in my last video, and showed how that came up with 27 matches, and it also came up in Scriptures 2012 through 2017. But I talked in my last video how it actually goes through to 2018, where this sentence continues through to the next verse, and that's where it says, "Behold, we go up to Jerusalem." Okay, but getting back to the mitosis table, you can see that right in the center of the table, if you put in just the word mitosis, you come up with the scriptures Ezekiel 2017 and Ezekiel 2018, and those are the two scriptures that come up right in the center of the symmetrical pattern when you put more terms in with the word mitosis. Okay, so I wanted to talk about how this is all a representation of DNA. I actually wanted to mention that at the end of my last video that I had done a few days ago, because if you look at the wall, the word wall over here where it says, "So the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up to the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city." If you look at the word wall, I've shown this before in other videos, but at the time when I did those videos, I didn't understand as much as I do now about what is being represented here. But I had pointed out before that the word wall is Strong's number 2346. So you have the 23 chromosomes, which make up the two sets of the 23 chromosomes for a total of 46 chromosomes in the human body. So I believe the word wall here represents DNA. And so this is all a representation of the restoration of the DNA. Okay, there's something else that I wanted to point out, and this goes back to the Nibiru table. When I was doing research on the Sea of Galilee, after I had done some videos about the Dead Sea, this is when I noticed that the word Galilee, the very first place that it comes up is in Joshua 2:7, which is where the Nibiru table comes up. It's interesting that it also has 72 matches. It occurs 72 times in 71 verses. So I thought that was really interesting as well. But the very first one is in Joshua 20:17. And the other thing that I noticed that is really important and interesting is that the word Galilee actually means circuit. And it's interesting that you have this symmetrical pattern here with the word Galilee. I had forgotten that. So it's 1551. So you have the symmetrical pattern here, but it means circuit or district. And I had talked about how this is the same word. It's the same meaning as the word. Okay, it's the same meaning as the word Gilgal. You see that's located right here. This is where they camped after they took over the city of Jericho. It's right where you have the Jordan River, which I've explained before represents DNA. You have the city of Adam right here, right above that, which is really interesting. And so I'll get into that a little bit more. But if you look at the word Gilgal, which is the place where they encamped after they crossed the Jordan rivers, it says here in Joshua 4:19, it says the people came out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, so this would have been around the time of the Passover, and encamped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So I think it's interesting that it comes up in verse 19. I don't know if that's an indication of things being extended until the Passover, but most of the evidence is pointing towards 2017, 2018, which is the year we're in right now. But as you can see here, the word Gilgal means a wheel or rolling. So it's a form of the same word. This one is 1537. And I had noticed this word because of the Gimel Lamed. So again, you have the symmetrical pattern. And this is the same word, a form of the same word that was coming up in Ezekiel 10. which is the word Galgal. You see that here in Ezekiel 10:2, where it talks about the wheels, and this is the word that was pointed out by Pastor Sandy Armstrong in a video that he did some time ago, where he was told by God that the number 120 represents, it's a gematria for the word wheel or Ezekiel's wheel, but he was told that the number 120 represented coming full circle. I'll try to find that video and put it in the description box, but I noticed the Gimel Lam and Gimel Lamed, so it's all the same word, and you can see that means wheel or whirlwind. So I believe this is a representation of DNA. You see it comes up with 11 matches here. Okay, so Galilee is a form of this same word. I'll show it to you again. You can see the word Galilee right here. Again, it's symmetrical, 1551, and it means circuit or district. And I thought that was very important, being that this is where the word Nibiru comes up in the scriptures. It comes up exactly where you have the first mention of the Sea of Galilee in Joshua 27 and 28, which looks like 2017 and 2018. And so I'm showing the second match here was coming up in the first book of Peter, chapter 3. So it's interesting that the second match comes up in the book of Peter, which means rock. But the first match for Nibiru was coming up in Joshua 27. I'll show it to you again. I have to wait for it to scroll to play, the video to play. But the first match was coming up in Joshua 27 and 28. Let me back that up again. So you can see that's 27 and 28, which looks like 2017 and 2018. Okay, and the reason that's important is because planets travel in a circuit, and I couldn't even think of the word originally. I had to put in the word circuit so that I could think of the word that I was thinking about, which is the word orbit, because planets orbit, or they go around in a circuit, and I had actually forgotten what the word was, and I had to put in circuit to remember. So it's just another word for orbit. Okay, so I don't know if God is saying that's when Nibiru will make its orbit again, or its circuit again in 2017, 2018, which is the year we're currently in. But those are the scriptures that come up in the table. But this is ultimately about DNA, and so you have Gilgal over here in this imagery, and then you have the larger imagery of Joshua's conquests. And so I'll just show you this map over here. You see this larger imagery with the Sea of Galilee located over here, but it means the same thing as Gilgal. They both mean circuit, which could represent DNA, but it also can represent everything coming full circle, or it can represent the word orbit, as in the planet Nibiru making its orbit. Of course, Jesus is the rock, and that's why the next table, the second match, was coming up in the book of Peter. Okay, but you also have this larger image, which is the kingdom that was promised to Joshua in Joshua 1, which eventually took shape under the reigns of King David and King Solomon. And so this was the empire of David and Solomon, so it ended up looking like this. And then right at the very tip of this image over here, or this empire, you have the Euphrates River. It's hard to see it from this image. Okay, I'll just show it to you here. You can see that that's where the Euphrates River is. And so it reminded me of this scripture over here in Jeremiah 51:63, which I couldn't really understand at the time when I first read this scripture. Let me pull up the whole chapter. But it's in verse 63 where it says, "And it shall be when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it and cast it in the midst of the Euphrates River. Of course, that's where it all began, in the Garden of Eden, but I'm about out of time.